All right, why don't we get started? Welcome to today's webinar, Preparing for Travel's Digital First Future, presented today in collaboration with our partners from WNS. My name is Jeremy Cressman. I'm research editor from SkiftX, and I'll be moderating today's session. We can advance to the next slide. So, to help give everyone some context for today's discussion, I want to start with a brief introduction to our topic, which explores the increasingly digital-first nature of the travel business. As many of us in North America, and I think even parts of Europe now recognize, travel's recovery has been quicker and also faster than expected. Skift Research has actually been creating a proprietary index of the travel industry's recovery over the past few months. This is basically a weighted average that looks at travel industry performance across 22 different markets around the world. And the trend you can see on this chart has been unmistakable. It's continued to climb month over month in 2021 with no signs of slowing down. And even now, with the COVID variants introducing some new uncertainty into the recovery forecasts, we continue to see signs that overall, the industry is back on an upward trajectory, with travelers around the world looking for opportunities to get back on the road. So with all this new demand surging back into the travel ecosystem, that's certainly cause for good news. But I think at the same time, this moment of optimism also requires those of us in the industry to also take a step back and to pause for a moment. And the reason that we need to do that is because today's recovery doesn't necessarily look like what it did before the pandemic. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, there are new consumer habits emerging. I think one great example of this is the growing demand for e-commerce, self-service, and contactless solutions that occurred during 2020. There was a study by a consulting firm called Capgemini, and they found that 62% of consumers expect to increase their use of contactless tech coming out of the pandemic. So there's a growing need here for organizations to actually deliver on the demands of what consumers need from a technology perspective. Second, in today's travel industry, we're hearing that travel executives are struggling to understand rapidly evolving industry dynamics. I think the insight here is that it's getting much harder to predict travel demand during this unprecedented global event. 1 minute consumer demand is soaring, the next minute that demand is falling. And just consider recent stories we've all heard about things like rental car agencies sold out of inventory, right? You can't get a car. Or consumers having to change their booking windows to these much shorter intervals. People used to book 6 months out. Now they're waiting until the day of or the week of to actually plan their travel. So all of this means that travel companies need much more sophisticated analytical strategies to actually predict demand. Otherwise, they run the risk of missing out or having lots of unsold excess capacity. Both of them are problems. Third, we're hearing about a growing demand from industry executives to adopt digital-first processes. Take, for instance, the results of a 2020 study that was conducted by Amazon and Skift, which found that close to 80% of travel executives plan to proceed with their plans to develop digital-first businesses, something that they're even planning to accelerate now despite the global pandemic that continues. So all of these trends leave us with an opportunity to make our businesses more ready for this emerging digital-first future. So we've now established why travel companies cannot simply proceed with business as usual. But if that's true, the next question is, what should we be doing differently? And I think there's a couple key characteristics of digital-first companies that we're seeing. One is that they're more data-driven. Now, I think every company out there is already gathering data. That's a given. But that is just the starting point for when we talk about being more data-driven. This also means that they're also applying data to make better decisions, whether that's better forecasting of demand from customers or figuring out how to more efficiently use scarce resources internally. Second, digital-first means providing more seamless experiences to customers. What that means is that no matter how your customers choose to get in touch with you, whether that's a call center, they get in touch over email, a ticket desk at the airport, whatever the method may be, you're always able to pick up with that customer right where you left off. Basically, for the customer, you make your interactions more valuable and convenient. You know that customer's name, their transaction history, any recent issues they might have. And doing this requires lots of data and coordination to actually make possible. Next, digital first means agility and resiliency. We all saw firsthand this past year how hard it was for businesses to serve their customers effectively. And digital gives companies the ability to evolve much more quickly when there are changes in customer behavior or a significant shift in the marketplace. It also means that companies are more able to handle shocks that may happen that are unexpected. That could be a global pandemic, like what we're going through now, or a disruption caused by a change in the business environment. Last but not least, digital-first companies are more efficient and profitable. Basically, they can operate with leaner teams and fewer resources while still serving the same volume of customers. And that puts them in a position to also take advantage of new opportunities as they arise. So how do we prepare our businesses for 2021 and whatever comes next? I think the answer to that will depend on three key questions we're going to be focusing on in today's panel discussion. First, why are old ways of doing business no longer sustainable? As you've already seen in the real world, there are consequences for the companies that choose to ignore this new digital-first reality. Second, how do travel brands actually embrace some of these principles? What should they be doing internally to actually make this happen? And third, what does success look like when you embrace digital-first principles? And so we're going to hear today from some company leaders that are actually going through this process with their own organizations to get some of their real-world thoughts on what this looks like. And so to help answer some of those questions, I'm going to be joined today by a panel of three travel industry experts. First, we have Manoj Chacko. He is Business Unit Head, Travel and Leisure for WNS Global Services. We also have Roshan Mandis. He is Chief Commercial Officer at Sabre Travel Solutions. Finally, we're also joined today by Gabe Rizzi. He is President of Internova Travel Group. Before we get started, I have one last announcement. I want to take a moment to introduce today's sponsor, which is WNS. WNS is a leading business process management, or BPM, company who combines deep industry knowledge with technology, analytics, and process expertise to co-create innovative, digitally led transformational solutions with over 380 clients across various industries. WNS delivers an entire spectrum of BPM solutions, including industry-specific offerings, customer experience services, finance and accounting, human resources, procurement, and research and analytics to help reimagine the digital future of businesses. One last note before we get started with our panelists. Go forward one more slide. Feel free to share any questions you may have in the Zoom chat window throughout our talk. We're going to try and cover a few of those questions either during the chat or in a dedicated Q&A at the end. We also encourage everyone who's on Twitter, social media, share your thoughts using the hashtag #SkipLive. Finally, there's going to be a video recording of this session on Skipped in the coming days. Don't feel like you need to take notes or worry if you miss anything. You'll be able to watch it on demand later. So with that, let's now turn things over to our panelists. Manoj, Roshan, Gabe, welcome so much to today's event. We're happy to have you.
Good to be here. Thanks for having us.
So I think I want to start at a broad level. I want to know how the pandemic had an impact on the overall business strategies of companies in the travel industry. And if it did, in what ways? Manoj, maybe you can start us off with this question.
Yeah, sure, Jeremy. So obviously the pandemic has had, it's turned everybody's life upside down. And I guess it's an understatement to state that. And obviously, the industry that has got impacted the most is travel and aviation. Now, what's really, how does it kind of pan out for, travel companies and airlines? I think it starts at the core, so if you just look at the core, airlines are really trying to relook at their fundamental network strategy. Do they go, via hub? Do they want to kind of go point to point? Core concepts of network planning. Then the second most important thing they're looking at is the kind of aircraft that they're using. Do you want a 380? Do you want a Dreamliner? Do you want something that is more efficient? So the entire airline industry, which is the core of travel, is actually being fundamentally relooked at in terms of the metal they use, in terms of the network strategy, in terms of how the consumers are going to kind of come back to fly. So that's one part of it. The second part of the industry is, of course, when it comes to distribution, whether it's the travel agencies, whether it's the technology companies, all of them have to actually adjust to the new normal, where the whole customer behavior angles are changing now. Today the customers are really kind of looking at end-to-end travel. They are looking at what are the kind of border control challenges you would have, which countries would accept you, what are the quarantine regulations, how do I travel back to my country? So there's a whole bunch of consumer behaviors that are changing, which is actually deeply impacting all facets of the travel ecosystem.
So interesting to hear how it's impacting companies. I'd like to know more about this concept of digital first that I talked about. And Manoj, you alluded to this in your answer as well. What does digital first actually mean in the travel industry? And why is this so important to this new environment? And I'm wondering, Roshan or Gabe, what are your thoughts on this? Roshan,
maybe I'll just focus on the second part of that question, which is why is it so important in this environment? I can think of three big reasons that have been caused by the last 18 months of all of us living on Zoom and Teams. As it relates to travel, the first category that I can point out is we are just way more aware of hygiene and sanitization when we travel. Right. And I know this is true of me. I am much more inclined to exchange human interactions for machine interactions, just for hygiene and sanitization reasons, for which digital services are essential. Secondly, over the last 18 months, all of us have gotten used to a very different set of expectations on how we get served digitally. And as travel comes back, and it's only 40% back globally, so we can't actually say that it has recovered to any level of normal state. But when we do come back, our expectations of travel and travel providers will be very different, and we will be expecting the changes and the improvements that we saw through grocery stores and restaurants and any kind of service that we availed ourselves of over the last 18 months. We would expect those same changes, so those same improvements from travel service providers. And the third category is across a number of sectors in the industry, we still have 50% of folks who are on furlough. And what it has also exposed is things like the need for automation, cancel refunds, et cetera, et cetera. We are well aware of the cost that these kinds of activities drive when it's pushed to an extreme. And that need for automation when travel comes back so that entities like us and other providers can operate at scale and efficiently has caused a heightened need for digitization and being digital first.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Like this need for flexibility, part of it, hygiene is part of it, even though it doesn't feel like a digital capability, it's become one. And then this need for better customer experiences. Gabe, it sounded like you had some thoughts here too.
Yeah, no, for sure, Jeremy. And just to build on what Roshan said, Forbes did a really interesting piece, and it said in the article that an unwavering focus just on tech, because we think of digital first as humans are not part of that equation at times. And while we completely agree that there's a role for, contactless interaction, to ensure hygiene and all, an unwavering, focus on tech could be a recipe for losing customers because tech doesn't demonstrate empathy, right. And I can tell you that, personally, having just traveled to Europe, at times it almost felt like splitting the atom to figure out what the right COVID protocol adherence was, because the time frames for testing was different going in versus coming out, what form was allowed, what information needed to be on the form, and trying to navigate that in a tech-only environment was difficult. For those of you who are not familiar with Internova Travel Group, we're one of the largest travel service providers in the world, and we've got over 62,000 travel advisors, and we believe tech first means empowering them with the insight, knowledge, and expert guidance so that they remain at the center of travel. And being digital first doesn't always mean tech first. It means empowering humans through the process.
I think that's such an important point, as we move into this digital first world, automation, the empathy and kind of the human aspect of this is really important. Gabe, let me ask you a follow-up question to this. Why do you think adopting this digital first approach is going to help companies such as your own in the future? Like, what are the benefits that you're seeing?
Well, I think, and it's a great question. I think what it allows is you to be there where your clients, your agencies, your advisors want you to be. So having a digital first approach allows you to incorporate an omni-channel servicing layer. And we actually partner with WNS to help us with that. Because while we're on this panel for being digital first, I would say we haven't arrived. We're on this journey with many of you. And I looked at some of the companies that are represented in the audience, and there are some real leaders in digital first. And you can either build expensive, difficult to maintain, or you can buy, which can be very expensive, or you can partner and leverage lessons learned from others who happen to be experts in that space. And we've chosen to do the latter two, which is either partner or buy, but predominantly partner. And that way we can focus on what we're great at, which is delivering service, but emboldening and empowering the people delivering that service through partners like WNS to give us the insight, the knowledge, the expertise to deliver that digital first experience, but keeping humans at the center of it.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point about partnering, because a lot of these capabilities are not necessarily inherent or organic to these companies. It's something where having an outside expert partner can really help. I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about the data aspect of this, right? We're all hearing about all of this data that's available to companies. We all know it's important. People use it as this buzzword. But why is data such an important part of travel industry decision-making moving forward? Roshan, I think you had some thoughts on this. What are your thoughts on the importance of data, or why we need to do it, or what's so important about it?
Yeah, happy to opine on it. I'll say a few reasons. So firstly, as an industry, I think the travel industry has been behind in leveraging data to the fullest potential, which is a bit ironic, because if you look a few decades ago, things like yield management, network optimization, those types of things were invented in the travel business. But somehow when it came to using data that is customer specific, as an industry, we are not at the cutting edge. So we have some catching up to do. Secondly, in buying and selling travel, context is incredibly important.
Sure.
But in a simple travel query, you're getting Manoj or Roshan or Gabe saying, I want to go from X to Y on such and such date. The simple query is fairly data poor. So to get context, you have to understand where we may have been shopping before, what we have done in the past, what kind of mood we are in, who we might be traveling with, et cetera, et cetera. And the concept is that if you can understand the context of a person's travel, your predictability of what they might buy goes up exponentially.
Yeah,
and and if you can predict what they might buy, then you're able to better convert, probably have travelers buy higher value things. And then I'd say lastly, to my previous point, customers also now expect you to know them. Even if they don't tell you much about themselves, they expect you to know them, because there are methods and technologies and techniques to know people, even if they're entering a fairly simple query. So, Sabre is a travel technology B2B company, and one of our latest ventures is with our technology partner Google, launching the Sabre Travel AI platform, artificial intelligence platform, that enables both agency customers and supply customers to have the products and technologies that will enable them to understand who is at the other end of a search query and better sell and present to them.
Sure. Yeah, I think the context aspect of what you're describing is so important, because you've shown a couple hundred options in a search. How do you make sense of that? And knowing that detail, even if the customer doesn't reveal it, can be really important. And that's actually a great segue to what I wanted to ask you, Manoj, which is just about what difference does it make how the data is actually recorded or captured? We all hear there's all of this data out here, we have it, but how do we actually use it in a way? And like, what is the cadence of how frequently you need to be collecting it to actually use it in a good way? What do you think?
Yeah, so Jeremy, gone are the days when everybody spoke about statistical sampling. When do you kind of pick up data points and then start analyzing it? I mean, so today we are leaving digital footprints every single second. Okay, and these digital footprints are available, for you to actually start doing the right kind of predictive analytics, something very similar to what Roshan spoke about. And in terms of how often do you need to collect it, or what's the cadence, you're actually collecting it real time. The cost of data storage, the cost of technology has actually come down to such an extent that there's actually an overload of data. So gone are the days when you actually need to ask, let's say, a customer what's his, let's say, for example, a seating preference, or what's the kind of meal he wants to have. Because if you have data for 2 of the flights he's taken, you already know what he's looking for.
Sure.
Okay, you can even figure out things as to, what's the kind of restaurant he wants to, have a beer when he's possibly boarding a flight in the evening from a particular airport. So it's really about bringing information together, and that's really where the entire concept of digital cockpits start coming in. But what is more important is, how do you make sense out of this data? So it's not a lack of data being available, but it's actually using that data to actually make the right kind of decisions, okay, so that you can actually be impactful to your customer. And it's like, when we talk about artificial intelligence, supporting, trying to replace human intelligence,
right.
Actually it is looking at all these data points to actually take care of human stupidity, which artificial intelligence can't handle. Correct. And that's really the kind of,
right.
That's where all this data comes in very helpful, Jeremy.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great point about human fallibility. Like, the machines are only as good as the humans that design them, right? So, Gabe, I wanted to ask you, as you look at your own organization and how you're making use of data, do you think your organization is going to need to evolve how you collect it or how you're managing it? What have you learned so far from this process of either working with WNS or just from your own experience?
I think every company has to evolve. You've really got 2 types of data. You've got structured, easy right. to sort, easy to manipulate, easy to analyze. And then you've got unstructured. And unstructured, rich media, pictures, sentiment, reviews. That's where the goal is. That's where the real insight is. That's if, that was this whole program. We just had a campaign called Go Human, Book Human, because the sentiment is really what resonates with your clients, with your employees, with your business partners, is that unstructured data. And the computing horsepower and the methodology by which you curate that unstructured data and actually tease out the insights isn't easy. Requires investment, requires AI, because it's, to Manoj's point, it's massive. You keep hearing this buzzword that data is the new oil. I don't really agree with that, because oil's finite. Data is infinite, so we're getting more and more data, to Manoj's point, by the second. So, but if you can dig into that unstructured data, you'll uncover personalization opportunities to really connect and create true, meaningful relationships with your business partners, like Roshan and Manoj, and also with your clients. So that's really where we see. So we fully, wholeheartedly get behind the fact that you need to innovate your approach, and you need to invest in your data warehousing and your data manipulation.
Absolutely. We're running a little bit short on time, so I want to skip ahead to the topic of becoming more customer-centric and just how digital is affecting the customer experience, right? So with that topic in mind, I want to turn a question over to Manoj and ask, what, if anything, did you see change with customer behavior during the pandemic? We mentioned some things in the introduction, but I'm curious for your assessment.
Yeah, so a whole bunch of areas, actually, Jeremy. So I think one of the most important aspects that's actually come up is really health and safety. So the pandemic has actually thrown a lot more focus on the whole health and safety aspect. The second one is like how Gabe just mentioned. I mean, say sometimes just understanding the way different countries, border control, documentation you need to have. It's just so different, so I could be flying from Mumbai to London on a particular airline, and maybe, I go on a one-stop airline and my entire requirements are so different. Okay. And, certain countries accept certain test reports, certain countries don't accept certain test reports. So it's kind of a lot of health and safety related aspects which kind of increase the amount of consumer queries. So actually what we've actually started seeing, basis a lot of the work that we do with travel clients around the world, is the querying has actually gone up. Okay, and it's not simple, straightforward queries. They are queries that are very relative to where in that particular travel cycle that particular traveler is.
Right.
So the ability to answer back that question as well, it's humanly impossible. So you really need to have technology supporting you, to be able to kind of answer that. So for example, a travel consultant, say, who's sitting, let's say, in Gabe's company, say, if he needs to answer a real-time question to a traveler, let's say, standing at Dubai airport, he needs to know the context, he needs to know from where he's arrived. It's a whole bunch of parameters that are actually coming in, which typical human beings can't handle. So technology has to play a very, very important part. And then, of course, all of the other elements like, sentiment analysis, what's really happening at that point of time, all become very critical in that particular situation, Jeremy.
Okay, so it's a complex process, but we've definitely seen some evolution over the past few months for sure.
That's right.
Roshan, I want to ask you, travel, of course, this is a business focused on serving customers, but I'm wondering if there's something new or different in this idea of being more customer centric. I've heard this term used, customer centricity. Why do you think that's now trending, and what does that mean to you?
Yeah, there's a famous quote from Bill Gates, I think, that says we always overestimate the amount of change in the next 2 years and underestimate the level of change in the next 10 years.
Huh.
And that quote was true, I think, till about February 2020. And then we could not have possibly overestimated the amount of change that has happened over the last 18 to 24 months. And the reason I bring that up is because the spirit of customer centricity has been fundamental to travel for ages. Travel has always been about people and a people business. But what has changed over the last 18 months is that the possibility of doing that and literally having the customer at the center of travel and surrounded with tracking ability, influencing ability to provide seamless travel experiences, analyzing data, predicting their behavior, has made it that much more practical. And I think it was Gabe who may have referred to this in a previous question. And this technology and this product will, over the next probably 12 to 18 months, literally put customers at the center of travel, enabling and empowering B2C travel companies like Internova and other such customers that we have to be more practical and pragmatic and make customer centricity possible. So the spirit has remained the same, but technology has now made it ever more possible.
I have one other topic I want to touch on before we get to the end of the panel, which is technology investment, because obviously there's a software component to this. There's potentially a hardware component as well. And Roshan, I think I wanted to ask you again, but if other panelists have thoughts, feel free to chime in. Do you think this transition to digital first practices or customer-centric practices is going to require any new investment from travel firms to make real?
Yeah, it's gonna take massive investment, and here's why. I'll take Sabre as an example. We are a B2B travel technology services company, as I said, and we are now in the middle of a multi-year technology transformation with Google, all to make these kinds of capabilities possible for our customers who are buying these services from us. And investments in technology products, people, processes, data storage, and let's not forget security. That also becomes so vital when we are storing and analyzing so much data that is close to customers. And that is hundreds and hundreds of millions of industry spent. And of course, the flip side of that is there's not a long list of companies who can spend at that level, and only scaled companies can. I mean, the three represented here, Sabre, WNS, Internova, are fully capable of doing this. But this has huge implications for much smaller travel companies that didn't have the balance sheet to do this going into the pandemic, and now compromised in being able to keep up with the technology spend and investment that is necessary to compete.
So, yeah, I mean, that's why we chose to partner, with Roshan and Manoj in this, because, there's a lot of multi-million-dollar roadkill in travel technology on the sidelines. And we would rather leave it to the experts to develop that, and we partner with them in that endeavor. And I'm really glad that Roshan brought up the people aspect of it, because the people that have that expertise and that talent level are not inexpensive, are in very, very high demand. And they're gravitating towards the more innovative companies, which makes them even more expensive. Right. So that's why we choose to partner.
Yeah. So I'd like to leave a little bit of time to wrap up with some final thoughts. Where do each of you think this digital first future is heading? Like, what is going to be most important, or what do you see as the next step? Any closing thoughts before we get to some audience questions? Manoj?
So maybe I'll go first, Jeremy. So I guess digital first is here to stay. And, and if you really look at, the way things are transforming, the last 18 months is transforming the entire travel industry landscape in a way that we have never seen before. While we've been fairly evolved as an industry, possibly the last biggest innovation that happened in travel was about 20 years back with the advent of the e-tickets. So it's really like, it's really waited this long, but the speed at which we are kind of seeing digital adoption across the entire, value chain is unprecedented. And again, what one is beginning to see, and somewhere in the beginning, I guess Roshan mentioned it somewhere, is, the lines are blurring between travel and the other industries. So, so whether it's retail, whether it's, any other industry, it's kind of coming to the same normal. So I guess that's really where, this whole industry is headed.
Any closing thoughts, Roshan, Gabe?
Yeah, I can, I'll go next. Look, if I put myself in the traveler's shoes, and most of us who work in the travel industry are avid travelers, I think it's an exciting time. Coming out of this pandemic, I think all of us are even more motivated to go to as many places as possible and do it as quickly as possible, because we feel like that opportunity was robbed of us over the last 18 to 24 months. So I think the digital first, customer centricity, all these concepts, the hope is that travel will be that much more fulfilling, that much more exciting, that much more personalized, and that much more seamless when the three companies that we represent and various other companies adopt these techniques and technologies to provide a much superior experience that may be better than what we were used to.
Right.
And closing, I would say that, learn from, we've not been perfect in execution of this. And I guess our advice would be, don't look at this as a departmental initiative, look at it as a whole enterprise initiative. Because I can tell you, we started with digital marketing, but didn't digitize the customer service process that supported it. And it wasn't a great experience. So now it's an end-to-end process. So, remember that machines cannot exemplify empathy, and empathy is what builds trust, and trust builds people on the road and travel and doing business with you. So, keep humans in the center of it, align with great partners like are on this webcast, and and keep at it. Great.
Well, that's awesome. Some great closing thoughts from everyone. I'd love to leave a little bit of time now to get to a few audience questions if you're up for it. Let's pull up and see what we've got here. So we had someone ask about end-to-end engagement, this idea of seamless omni-channel experiences. Can any of you share a real-life example of a traveler experience that benefits from end-to-end engagement? And I don't know, Gabe, I'm just thinking of you and your business. Can you share an example, but both Manoj and Roshan too, if you have ideas.
Of course, one of the things that we did was we actually mapped the traveler journey from point of research to point of booking to point of travel to point of return to point of expense, and looked at all of those friction points that made it not enjoyable along the way. So typically what we'll have is we'll have a customer that will go through a booking tool, will book a trip, may get to the airport, flight's delayed, may be canceled, may chat with us. Okay, so they booked it online. Now they're chatting with us through SMS. Okay, now one of our advisors is responding back through SMS, rerouting them. They get to their destination, their meeting runs long. We send them a text and say, you know what, we noticed that there's a 50% chance of your return flight being delayed based on history. Would you like us to rebook at a later time? We do that. Okay. Right. Then they get to the airport and they can't get Wi-Fi access. They call us. All of these, and those advisors need access to that passenger name record, no matter what channel they booked it. Sure. So they have to make sure that that PNR is accessible in that multi-channel approach, because so often folks start out multi-channel, but the channels don't talk to each other. Yeah. They're discrete queues. And that's where having a true multi-channel contact center environment is critical.
I've seen this happen before on Twitter. Someone's like, my flight's delayed, and the airline is reaching out and trying to figure out who they are and get their booking information. It's like having all that information seamlessly on the back end can make such a difference to serving that customer better.
Right.
Manoj, it looks like you had something to say here.
Yeah, so I was just kind of wanting to add on to what Gabe said. What we've specifically started seeing right now, across multiple clients that we work with, is the entire lines are now blurring between various elements of the trip. So it is not just about the flight and any delays and stuff like that. It also goes into the car rental that you're trying to take, the hotel, the entire life cycle of the journey becomes very critical, which was not the case possibly pre-pandemic. The pre-pandemic clients still were okay about compartmentalizing parts of their trip. Okay, but what we're seeing right now is, clients really want to see a full seamless experience, going end to end, and all elements of the ecosystem must then be prepared to manage it. And the only way to do it is you've got to be digital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Roshan, or I'll take another question? It's fine.
Manoj and Gabe stole my example.
Okay, fair enough.
But I would just say that to enable what Manoj and Gabe just went through, underlying component of it is the single image of a customer that is updated in real time. That was one of the questions that you asked previously about what is the frequency. And if you don't have that, and it sounds simple, but it's very hard to execute to, is to have an accessible real-time single image of the customer. Without that, all these things that we just talked about becomes impossible to do. And that is a foundational aspect that, again, can only be digitally constructed and maintained.
Right. There's some complex choreography going on here that can only be done with the evolution of new tools. So we had a question from the audience about how digital transformation could be embraced by the larger section of the travel industry. They talk about people being fragmented and unstructured. I think there was also a question about organizations that maybe have a limited budget. What are your thoughts on this for a company that's just getting started in this? They don't know what to do. What is the first thing they should do, or what is an easy or kind of initial step to take to start on becoming more digital first?
So maybe I'll just kind of give, maybe I'll just kick it off, and then possibly Roshan or Gabe can,
Sure.
Pick it up from there. So I think the first most important part is, you should not make it too complicated. A lot of times, we kind of bring in a lot of unwanted complexity trying to solve a problem. Okay, so my advice would be, first try and understand what exactly is it that you want to support the client with. What exactly is the outcome that you want, and then try to see, what's the kind of solutions available out there. Again, do you partner, do you buy, do you kind of, try to build it yourself? But today, there's so much of technology and so much of stuff that's available out there. You just need to focus on what's the outcome you want to drive. So once you're clear about what's the outcome you want, then you can actually reverse engineer that to a particular extent to go and say, where can I find it? Who can help me do it? And it may not be a one-stop shop that may be able to solve it for you. You will possibly need to work with maybe 3 different partners, 4 different partners, to kind of end up with a solution. And I think that's really the approach that companies need to take.
Right. Goals-oriented seems very smart. I agree with that.
And as I mentioned before, not taking that siloed approach, look for the points of friction in your business, whether it's travel, whatever your business lies. And what is your buyer journey? And then decide to attack which elements create friction along the way. Because things that you may think, mystery shop yourself. And understand what is the buying experience, what is the traveling experience, and you might be amazed at what you discover in doing that secret shopping.
Roshan, any last thoughts?
Look, I would just say that sometimes I feel envious of companies that are starting up today, because digitally transforming a business like ours, which is many decades old and very large, is actually harder than maybe starting in this environment where cloud computing is cheap, technology is cheap. There are lots of ways in which you can access it economically, and then you can invest surgically on a dimension where you want to differentiate. So as daunting as it might be to be starting now, sometimes you're at an advantage, or because how difficult and costly it is to be transforming an established business to suit today's world.
Yeah, that's such a great point about the cost of this has come down so dramatically. This is such a great time to be using cloud computing resources. Storage has gotten so much cheaper. It's much easier than ever before. So I think that's a great way to leave things. Manoj, Roshan, Gabe, really appreciate your thoughts today. I just had 1 or 2 things to wrap things up before we finish here. Thank you again to our panelists. And then just a special shout out to WNS Global Services again for partnering with Skift on this event. We really appreciate it. If you want to learn more about what WNS does, you can go to wns.com. And thank you again to everyone for listening today. We'll see you all later.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.